Hello, welcome to the Loney Show. I'm your host, John Maloney, and in this episode, we have a guest. He is from Phoenix. He currently works on the human phenomena and multiple dimensions. That's all I can think of because this man is an absolute expert. He goes more than beyond what we currently see. So I'll let him do most of the talking. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jim Marshall.
Hello, Peter.
Hello.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself,
Okay.
kind of to get us into some relevant questions. I am the inventor of a practical philosophical system called Septemics. That's Septemics. And the author of a book called Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. The book would dramatically improve the life of anyone who takes advantage of it. If you would like to find out about Septemics, go to septemics.com. As for my qualifications, I am a polymathic intellectual whose areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, parapsychology, science, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, education, and music. And I hold a Bachelor of Science cum laude from City University of New York.
Interesting. Now, what is Septemics?
Septemics is a philosophical system based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, which span the spectrum of human experience. There are 24 scales which apply primarily to individuals, and 11 scales which apply primarily to groups.
Interesting. I hope you don't mind me asking, what made you get into this particular field?
Well, I worked for decades as a human potential engineer. That is something like a counselor or facilitator, but not for crazy people or sick people. I worked with above average people. And so most of the psychological information is not terribly relevant. So I sort of had to cobble together my techniques from a variety of alternative subjects. Now, while doing this, my clients all got tremendous gains. And I observed that they would go up scales. In other words, they would advance by steps, regardless of the person. And I started writing down what I observed of them. So eventually I had a bunch of these scales of different lengths. Now there's one scale in particular that I had been working on for 20 years. And I knew that it was correct, but it only had 6 levels. In 1995, I found a 7th level, and then the whole thing clicked together mathematically, philosophically, and then I realized, wait a minute, I'm onto something big here. And I thought, well, I need to look at my other scales and see, maybe they have 7 levels and I just don't know it. And when I looked at the other scales, most of which did not have 7 levels, I immediately found the remaining levels, the remaining 2 or 3 levels, depending on which scale it was. Then I realized, this is big. This is something much bigger than what I was even. And I went forward with it on the idea of the theory that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. And eventually, I put together 35 scales. And I worked on this book for 25 years. I did research. I spoke to many brilliant people about it. And eventually, I wrote a book, which is available And it was not easy to write this book because I was presenting a completely new subject. It was not my intention to create a new subject when I started writing the book. I wanted to convey what I knew, but I was sort of painted into a corner because Septemics is in fact a separate subject.
Interesting, interesting. How is Septemics beneficial?
I wrote this book to help people. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons or group, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. Moreover, just finding out what level you, another person, or some group is at is by itself enlightening and beneficial. Finally, once you know the actual level of a person or group, you can improve that person or group by moving them up one level at a time. All of these advantages represent major steps forward for society. Each of these scales is an axis against which to evaluate human behavior. Combined, they empower one to understand, predict, and manage human affairs to a degree hitherto unattainable by most.
Right. Very interesting. Does Septemics apply to everyone or just some people?
It applies absolutely. I spent a lot of time making sure that that was true. Of course, you have to be able to read English reasonably well. But yes, it applies to all people in general, across all lines, be they gendered, racial, ethnic, historical, social, religious, cultural, economic, educational. These scales transcend any other categories of people. Needless to say, the person must make an effort to get these scales to help him in order for them to work. But it's not that hard. Almost anybody who can read English can do it.
Great, great. When you did the research on Septemics, what kind of discoveries have you found out when you did your research?
Well, basically, each of the 35 scales is a massive discovery in and of itself. And in fact, the fact that these scales fit together the way they do, you'll find if you read the book that there are massive discoveries within each scale. Now, with 35 scales and 7 levels each, there's 245 different levels that I isolated. And of course, they all were put mathematically into a certain format. So it took a lot of work to resolve all of these data. Deriving this was a big job. And then once I derived it, then I had to express it in a practical system. And then I had to write it in a book that would convey it to not only academics and intellectuals, but also the. That took a lot of time.
Great, great. When you did your research, have you done like some kind of experiments with people or by yourself or with other people you've worked with in this field?
Yes. First of all, as a human development engineer, every session that I gave was, in a sense, research. Because remember, I didn't know I was looking for Septemics. Excuse me, my phone is ringing. I didn't know I was looking for Septemics. And so all this data came to me as a result of this work that I did, this groundbreaking work with individuals. And after a while, when I started seeing the pattern that I explained before, and I found that one scale that worked perfectly in 7 levels, then I was able to extrapolate the remainder. But also, some of the work that I did with clients was specifically research work. I mean, all of it was research in a general sense, but certain sessions I did specifically as research, although that was usually to test something specific, to resolve some specific question. But really, because I was doing work, even the term human development engineer, I had to invent the term because nobody was doing what I was doing. So all this data that came to me, and of course, when I worked with my clients, and so I was able to refer to my notes and cross-reference these things and seeing people manifesting these skills. The other thing was, once I had the skills, I was able to see them in action in life. For example, I can tell you, the first scale in the book is the scale of basic purposes. I can tell you the basic purpose of every president of the United States going back to FDR. Just by listening to them, observing them, they tell you. If you know what the scale is, they tell you these things. It's not that hard if you know the data. So after I was able to see it in life, and in particular, seeing people in life who did badly going down the same scales that my clients were going up, that really nailed it. Because I could see that whether you were going up or going down was the same phenomenon.
Interesting. This is very insightful. Absolutely love it.
Thank you.
So, throughout your entire research, were there any faults, or you discovered something that just didn't work out as you thought it would?
Well, first of all, let me say, the first scale in the book, which is called the Scale of Basic Purposes, first of all, I had the scale many years before I knew what I was looking at. In other words, it took me many years to figure out what axis is this. I didn't know it was a scale of basic purposes. In other words, I knew the 7 levels and I knew what they were manifesting, but what was this thing that I was looking at? Now, as I said, I worked 20 years on that one scale before I finally found the 7th level. You have to realize, I wasn't really looking for a 7th level, but it just came to me one day that one of my clients was at this particular level. And when it fitted into the scale, then the light bulb went on to my head, over my head. And
Okay. Now, in terms of, in correlation to your research, were there any role models or heroes that you looked up to growing up that correlates with your research?
Well, yes and no. I'm a polymath. I was a studious person from earliest childhood. I was shocked at the age of 10 to find out that some kids did not like school. I found that incomprehensible. I loved school. And I went to school for 28 years. And I admired greatly all of my teachers. Now, when I say my teachers, I'm talking about Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Cicero, Erasmus, Thomas More, Isaac Einstein. I consider these people my teachers. And when I was young, long before the internet existed, my favorite place was the library because I was surrounded by brilliant minds. And I could access these minds anytime I wanted to. And because I did not narrow myself down into a specific subject, I was eventually able to see the big picture. I did not get a graduate degree because I kept changing my major because I was interested in finding out the whole picture. In other words, for decades before I was even thinking about Septemics, I was looking for it. I was motivated even as a child to look for the pattern. I can remember, like when I was 10, 11, 12, reading the biographies of all the great men of the world, Washington, Jefferson, Pasteur, you name it, trying to understand, what is this? What? I could see that there was something there that nobody knew, and I wanted to know what it was. So there wasn't one person, but there were many persons and different people. The other thing about me that's different is I did not turn off certain people. For example, I read Marx, but it didn't make me a communist. I read Ayn Rand, but it didn't make me an objectivist. I read the Book of Mormon, but it didn't make me a Mormon, and so forth. Most people sort of, whether or not they're taking a graduate, anything else, they sort of get into a slot. And I didn't do that. I was a good student on every subject. So the fact that I got high grades in physics didn't prevent me from getting high grades in Latin, for example. So when I was 17, I was writing poetry in Latin for recreation. And I was reading the Aeneid by Virgil. That had a tremendous impact on me, reading this classical literature from 2,000 years ago, which is brilliant. Now, of course, you can read it in translation, and it's kind of clumsy, but when you read it in Latin of it. So he was somebody who sort of set me on the road to looking into all of these unknown things by asking questions that people don't usually ask.
Interesting. I'm actually starting to like this topic. I love it.
What was that? I didn't quite get you.
I'm actually getting very curious about this topic.
Well, you should. You should, because I can absolutely guarantee you that if you read this book and really understand it, in other words, you're not just flipping through it like a magazine, it will dramatically improve your life. I guarantee it. And the reason I can guarantee it is, remember I said, I've been working on this book for 25 years. I have seen the results. If you go to my website, there are comments from readers on the left side, but then there's a whole list of about 20 articles in various publications that are very, very positive, including several reviews. So I know the impact this book has on people, and I want people to get the benefit from this book.
Okay. Now, in general, how does Septemics work or function?
Well, the best way I could explain that is to tell you the general thesis of it. So this sounds a little off, but it's not easy to explain a new subject. So let me put it this way. The data in this book are and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect him to tell you the exact location and perhaps also how to get there. Needless to say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. For example, when I started driving extensively, long before the proliferation of GPS units, I was surprised to learn how many people did not know geographically precisely where they were, nor how to get there. More often than not, my request for directions to the location of the person on the other end of the telephone was requited by vague and often inaccurate instructions, which often did more harm than good. I learned to ask only for the address, which many could not give anyway, and then look it up on a good map. If this is so with physical locations, it's even more so with conceptual locations because they're abstract. Most people wander through life aimlessly, so much so that it's considered normal. Whether discussing politics, career, romance, finances, health, you name it, most people do not know where they are, where they are going, nor how to get there. If you want to improve your or another's condition, these scales are very useful because each scale is a roadmap for some area of human activity. It enables you to find out precisely where you are going, and how to get there, given some specific context. There are very few human behavioral to which at least one of these scales does not apply.
Okay. Now, how does someone use Septemics to help others like family, friends, business associates, etc.?
Okay, if you study these scales carefully and use them to resolve your confusions and dilemmas, your life will improve. The more carefully you study the scales and the more diligently and frequently you apply them, the more benefit you will receive. Whenever a situation or question arises in your life, turn to the appropriate chapter and analyze the situation against the relevant scale. Specifically, I would advise you to go through each relevant scale and find your level, either generally or regard some specific context, by an honest inspection of behavior and situation. Once you are sure you're at a particular level, try to get the idea of being at the next level up. Ask yourself, how would that manifest? Then work out a plan for how you would move to the next level. If you are correct about what level you are in, it will not be very difficult in most cases to find out what to do next, however arduous or lengthy the task might be. If you cannot work out how to get up to the next level, generally is because either you are actually at a different level than you think, or you have not fully comprehended the text. If you do these steps thoroughly for each scale, you will undergo a metamorphosis. Now, in certain scales, it might not be possible for you to go up a level in the near future, but merely knowing what level you are at will help considerably. For example, the first scale, the scale of basic purposes. That is a long-term phenomenon. Every human being has basic purposes, and most people go through their entire lives at one level of that scale. So it's not that easy to move yourself on that particular scale. It can be done, but let's say somebody has some big life-changing experience through meditation, through therapy, through facilitation. Like, for example, the Bible talks about Saul, who's on the road to Damascus and had some miraculous experience, and he became a Christian instantly. That was an example of him moving from level 2 up to level 1 on that scale. That's quite rare. So in this particular scale, the scale of basic purposes, knowing where you are and knowing where other people are is absolutely invaluable. For example, Hitler is at level 7 on the scale of basic purposes. His scale was to destroy. If the people of Germany had this book, they never would have voted for him in 1933.
Wow, that just blew my mind.
And I can give you hundreds of other examples. Stalin is at level 6, criminal. His goal was pleasure. He was just like Al Capone or Carlo Gambino or any other criminal. He was literally a bank robber. I don't know if you know that. And so, he behaved like a criminal. Anybody got in his way, he just killed them. He virtually exterminated the entire officer level of the Russian army, so that when World War II broke out, they had nobody to lead their army. That's why they took such terrible losses. They lost 20 million people because he killed off all of their officers. Anybody that bothered him, he just killed them, just like the mafia does. So again, if people had this book, they never would have allowed that. They would have done what the Romans did. Nero was a Roman emperor, okay? He was crazy. The Praetorian Guard killed him because they could see he was crazy. And they got another emperor there who wasn't going to do terrible, stupid things.
Okay. Can you describe to me each one of the scales and what descriptions they have?
Well, I have two answers to that. One is, I would be very happy to do that. But there are 35 scales, and each one is quite complex. And there's no way we could do that in the limited time that we have. We would need a very long format. And my understanding is this is only 30 minutes. And we only have 6 minutes left. However, the other answer is I have a slideshow. If you like, I will put it on the screen right now and show you some of the scales, and you can ask questions about them. Would you like that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
In fact, if you're free on any next Thursday, I can bring you on the Team Sketch podcast where we will do a Zoom meeting and you can actually show the rest of the gang your slideshow.
Okay. Now this slideshow shows all 35 scales, but I have to tell you that this is a textbook. Septemics is a subject like geometry, calculus, physics, chemistry, economics. It's very technical, it's very specific, and I know that because I spent 25 years guaranteeing that the scales were correct.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is it would be an enormous challenge to try to, even in an hour, to try to explain 5 scales. Now, even if I have the textbook up, people can see it and light bulbs will go on over their heads just in seeing the scale. For example, if you see the scale of basic purposes, the top level is saint, and that includes people like Jesus, Mahatma Gandhi, Yogananda, Siddhartha Gautama, and the bottom level is subversives. That's the smallest group, and that includes Adolf Hitler. So just looking at that, you will be able to see, I see this guy. That's why I'm having trouble with this guy. He's at this level or that level. And the scale of basic purpose is the most salient characteristic of a person. It tells you more about the person than any other single thing, because you know his basic purpose. Now, I never give the level of a living person, although I know them. Although I do give levels of deceased persons. I don't have any trouble finding anybody or any context on any scale because I've been working with it for so long. But anybody else would have to, study the scale, read the book, see what do I really mean by this level. And once you understand it, then it's very easy to take it and use it in your life. So for example, a guy will read the book and say, oh, I see, this girl was a criminal, level 6 on the scale of basic purposes. No wonder I had so much trouble with her. So there's only so much that could be done even in an hour. I would be glad to do it for you. I would even be glad to do sequences, in other words, a multiple. The problem is, it's very hard to understand the scales unless you read the largest section in the book, which is called Introduction to Septemics. It's by far the largest section, and it explains the whole science of septemics. It's very specific and it's very detailed, and it's a massive amount of information that a person would have to imbibe in order to then go and understand the 35 remaining scales. But yes, if you want to set up another one, I'll be delighted to do so.
Okay, great. And that's all the time we have for this episode. It was great having you here, Jim. Very insightful. I have no idea about Septemics until now. What you just said was very insightful, and it's got me a lot more. It got me more curious about Septemics now. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
And until next time, stay tuned for more.
This episode of The Alone Show is brought to you by Matchmaker.fm. Matchmaker is a platform where users can search up and book in with podcasting shows to do ad swaps, content collaborations, and make guest appearances. Now, as someone who just started making a podcast and want to look for guests or do some form of content collaboration, this is the platform I highly suggest to any of those people. And if you do want to be in the next episode of The Alone Show, all you got to do is go online to Matchmaker.fm, search up The Alone Show, send me a direct message, and just leave the rest to me. So what are you waiting for? Go online, make your very own guest profile today at Matchmaker.fm.